Hey everybody, welcome. This is just going to be a friendly little chatter with my good friend Shane the Runer. This is not like a regular formal show. Shane was just with me not too long back on Strange Mosaic, but we had a few things pop up during that conversation that we thought we'd make a separate video about. And so we're going to talk about that here, and that's going to be some issues related to diet and mind control, and both how it can contribute to mind control and also how it can help you to evade or break some of it. So we're going to do that here sort of for the public YouTube video, and then we're going to move over to the patron section and have a little chat about some of Shane's new work. And Shane, how you doing?
Wonderful.
Awesome. I like your
Another day in paradise.
Absolutely. I don't know how anyone could think this is anything other than that.
Yeah.
I like your shirt.
I wore it for you because you said that before.
Yeah.
On one of the last time I wore it, I guess, on a video.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, so I was like, I'll wear this one.
Yeah, I like that one. It's kind of like, it has like a Stranger Things vibe.
You can really see it. It's got the singer from In This Moment on it as well.
Oh.
This thing that she does, it's like kind of like Pan's Labyrinth, if you've ever seen that.
Huh. I didn't, I guess I've only seen the top part of the shirt, and I kind of thought about, like, it has sort of a Stranger Things vibe to it, right? And so, of course, there they have the upside down, right? That would imply that this is the right side up, which I don't know if that's the truth or not, but there's definitely an in-between space that I've watched that I know you have, and I'm like, oh, it's kind of like that. But it's sort of the tenet of so-called reality, right? Have you seen that? Have you seen anything with the new movie Tenet?
No, actually, I don't even think I've watched the full trailer for it, to be honest. I know I'll watch it because the director and the writer, I watch everything that they do, but I haven't really paid much attention yet.
So it's basically like there are two parallel realities where time runs the opposite direction in each one of them. And then there's like a zone sort of between, like where they can cross over, right? And where there's starting sort of some melding. So basically, like, I haven't seen the movie yet, but from the trailers, it's kind of like okay, so if you're in the timeline where time is traveling backwards, right? And we think of ours as traveling forward. So if somebody was in another space where it was traveling the opposite way, we think of it as backwards. But that would mean that things that haven't happened here yet have already happened there, right? So by coming over to this side, they can get out in front of them, right? And either stop them or change them, like be ready to catch the bullet or something like that instead of have it hit whatever it is, right? But it also seems to create, various kinds of anomalies, and then this sort of space in between and the way they cross over seem to be interesting and whatnot. Like, there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a lot of that going on with the various things we experience, but yeah.
Reminded me immediately of some snow globes I was recently explaining.
Yes.
We'll talk about later.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk with you a little bit about diet, because I know that, like, you earlier this year and myself as well, we're kind of experimenting with the carnivore diet, and I also know that you sort of go in and out of doing it as I do. So I kind of wanted to talk to you because if you talk to somebody who is full on carnivore diet, like, you get a very particular perspective that isn't in any way like reflective necessarily, or like neutral at how you're assessing it, right? And then if you talk to somebody who's like a vegan or opposed to the carnivore diet, right, you obviously get another version. And the same thing goes for if we're talking about veganism, which we may talk about a little bit as well. But when you kind of go in and out of, for me, I've been sort of using it as like a tool or like a baseline kind of thing. And so because I have time away from it, like, I feel like I have a different angle on it, and I'm assuming you do too, and I haven't really talked about it with anyone from that perspective yet. So am I right about what you're doing with it?
Well, I started in January where I went full for the whole month. At the end of the month, I just decided I was gonna break it, and that made me feel really shitty. So I didn't continue breaking it. I went back to it, and now what I do is I do it. I mean, I don't buy and cook anything else besides meat. At the same time, if I'm out somewhere and someone offers me something, I will, probably eat it. Or if it's free and it's in front of me, or, if it is that kind of thing, I might eat it. And, sometimes if I get a craving for something that's not carnivore, I will have it. But for the most part, I've just found that I stick to doing it because my body likes it. I enjoy it and I want it. And I've tried, like I've been vegetarian. I've gone full vegan. It just didn't last very long. I've been everywhere in between. Started with the keto thing, and that's where I got interested in the carnivore thing, was because I started hearing a lot about. I've had a lot of injuries for a lot of different reasons, and I've had a lot of inflammation because of them, arthritis problems, things like that, nerve damage in places. So I had heard that, you know, people with those problems were finding, like, you know, healing or like curing some of those problems. Whereas what I noticed when I went vegetarian fully, those all got a lot worse. Like I started to like actually like hurt more and be in a lot more pain and have a lot less energy, despite the fact that I was getting everything that I needed. And so I stick to it now kind of very loosely. I mean, it's not a rule. It's just what I like now because it makes me feel the best. And again, if I feel like breaking it for a day, then I'll break it for a day. Or if I you know, I'm offered, I don't like turning down food when it's offered to me. There's a weird energy thing that goes on in my head whenever I have to do that. So I do my best to accept it. So if it's at least something healthy, I'll eat it if it's not meat.
Yeah, so it's very similar to sort of what I've done. Like I've been vegetarian. I was vegetarian for a very, very long time, also vegan for a shorter time because that was really difficult to maintain, but and then I've done paleo, keto, candida, every diet you can imagine. And so for me, it was kind of a combination of, I was having some struggles with my body that I hadn't had before, and none of the usual tools that worked seemed to be addressing it. And people had been asking me a lot about the carnivore diet, which I had initially a couple years ago when it first became popular, poo-pooed it, right? And kind of like, that's ridiculous. But you know, over time, like kind of become a little more curious about it, and people were asking me more and more about it because I do nutrition consultations and all that kind of stuff. So I just decided to try it and did it just exactly like you. Like I went like full force for like several months, actually, pretty much, like where I was eating nothing but meat and like eggs and stuff like that. Except for one day a week, I was eating whatever, one meal a week, I was eating whatever I wanted, because I did know from my nutritional stuff that the ability to digest a variety of foods is an evolutionary advantage and an adaptation and all of that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to lose that. And also because I enjoy eating fancy food and I didn't want to set myself up for like, this isn't going to work. I wanted to give myself the best chance to really experience it. And I had all the same things happen with me that people who didn't do that, like who just went full on carnivore and didn't give themselves any, you know, other stuff at all. I had seemingly all those same experiences. So I don't think the one meal was enough to sort of alter that or shift that. And I did that pretty hardcore for like 3 or 4 months. And then I went on a trip and I started being a little bit more like, okay, like I do it during the week and not always on the weekend, or kind of like what you're talking about, like if I'm eating out or with some other people. And then once in a while, like I just get tired of it. Like I feel like I need something texturally else. So for a couple days until feel like I've satisfied whatever, you know, dissatisfaction I've had, I'll just kind of eat whatever and then I'll go back. And I kind of refer to it as like a lot of people are on a plant-based diet. And for some people that means vegan, but for others it just means they eat mostly plant-based food and they occasionally like, you know, supplement that with meat. For me, it's the other way around. I'm eating mostly animal-based foods. And occasionally I'll have some other things. So it's like between an 80 and a 90%, you know, kind of thing for me. And I found that works pretty well. Do you, when you're doing carnivore, do you drink coffee with your carnivore diet?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, coffee with cream. Like I don't do the sugar thing, but definitely the cream in the coffee. And I'm a coffee addict. I drink coffee and water. That's pretty much all I ever drink. I'm trying to stop myself just because of the overdosing on caffeine every day. But still, yeah, coffee and water, that's my go-to.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been doing coffee for it as well. Like I've been curious about, like if I decide to experiment any deeper with the carnivore diet in terms of like, I think it's I can go about a week with just eating beef and nothing else, right? But then you start to get the textural boredom. And so I don't do that too much. I mean, I eat raw fish sometimes. I'll eat other kinds of seafood, other kinds of meats and whatnot. But you know, if I were going to do like a month of like playing with another iteration of like a really strict carnivore diet, I think I'd try it with removing the coffee just to see
Yeah.
like how that goes. But yeah, I had noticed the same things as you, with particularly with the vegetarian and the vegan diet and stuff like that. Like I also have a lot of those joint and nerve kinds of injuries, and I was just always uncomfortable in my body and always tired. And that is definitely not the case with the carnivore diet.
No, it's amazing. Like I've had a lot of sleep issues in my life for many different reasons too. So it's actually helped with that quite a bit. And it's really strange because I wake up in the morning, and although I love coffee, I don't need coffee to wake up. I'm just awake. And then for the whole day, I've got that same level of high energy. Like I can go to the gym, I can work. I've been going to the gym for 8 hours and then
I
working.
can tell you've been going to the gym. I've been noticing your biceps in the last couple of videos. I can see them now too. Looking good.
And you know, I can do all of that, and then at the end of the day, when I go to bed, like it's nighttime and I need to sleep for whatever reason, but I'm not really tired. I'm just I feel good. I'm all right. If I needed to do something, I could, but it's bedtime, so I'm gonna go to sleep, and I can go to sleep. Really kind of odd. And the only times that I have the insomnia come back are when, you know, I fuck that up by eating a bunch of ice cream right before I go to bed or something stupid, right?
Yeah.
Uh, anytime I go off of it, I can feel the change, and it's not even just a digestion thing. It's
Yeah.
how my body is processing the energy from that food is different.
Yeah.
And I mean, energetically, there's a lot to be said for eating plant-based food, because there is a lot of available bioenergy there, a lot of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your body can take all of that either, which is something to consider. It's like the amount of, you know, you can take 100 milligrams of this vitamin or 50 milligrams of this vitamin, but if your body can only take 25 milligrams at a time, then it's only going to take 25 milligrams at a time. It's, you know, the same thing with like saying smoking weed. You can't get so stoned that you overdose, because there's a certain percentage of your blood that can be, you know, toxified by the THC, and therefore you can only get so high as it is.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes on with food. And on a carnivore diet, it's the same thing. Like if you overeat meat, you'll kick yourself out of ketosis, because your body starts processing it as carbs anyways. So it's like your body knows what to do with what you're putting into it. I personally think, through all of my experimentation, that we confuse the hell out of our bodies by continually changing it. You know, like I think it's good to change and have some change, but I think that change should almost be on a cycle, like almost like, you know, you let yourself go for a while, and then you know, adapt to something new for a while. That's how I kind of rotate through my meat sources now. Like I'll eat beef for 3 days, arbitrarily 3 days. I'll eat chicken for 3 days, and I'll eat pork for 3 days, or you know.
Yeah.
That's not actually how I do things. It's usually chicken and beef, and I eat pork with it anyways, because I just cook bacon with everything I make, because it's just some free fat, right? It tastes great. So, anyways, that it's like anything else, like working out, like training for gymnastics or martial arts, whatever you're doing, you need that repetition, right? Your body requires that repetition. It needs some form of routine in order for it to, you know, adapt and actually utilizes the changes that occur when you're making changes, right? Like if you suddenly switch your diet, it's going to take some time for that diet to catch up with your lifestyle, your body mass, your the way your body's functioning, all of that. It doesn't just happen overnight. You have to have some discipline and some routine and practice it for a while. And so a lot of people will jump on a diet, be like, oh, I'm 3 days in, I don't feel anything, so I'm just going to go to McDonald's, you know, and that's not the right attitude. You have to have discipline to experiment with these things. And I think everyone should, because, you know, we were taught way incorrectly right from the very beginning, and we know that now, right? Like it's a million documentaries out there can show you that now, whether it's pro-vegan or whether it's pro-meat, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to show you that the way that we were taught from the beginning was the worst, right? So let's not do that. So we know at least that much. So why don't you just try each way, right? And see how your body reacts, give yourself the proper amount of time to adjust to it so that you know how your body's actually reacting, and then make a informed decision as to what you would like to do from there for your own well-being. Obviously, there's a lot of other discussions to have when it comes to food and food sources, but I think when it comes down to like what's actually good for your body, that's going to vary from individual to individual, and you're going to have to do some experimenting to find out. And the carnivore thing was never really, ever since we had the pyramid of food, we haven't really ever seen that until just recently. Whereas like vegetarianism, veganism came out almost right away, or was always there anyways. The carnivore thing was really only a circumstantial thing, like certain tribes only had access to meat.
Yeah, like an Eskimo thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now that we have, we've come to a place in our world where we can, readily get things and have the option of experimenting with our diet as opposed to just following what our parents fed us when we were kids, and not what school said we were supposed to eat. Try it, like try different things, see how it makes you feel. And in terms of the mind control aspect of that, I saw a lot of it from program to program. Like each program had a kind of set meal structure, right? And now that I work in a long-term care facility, I'm actually being educated on why they do that. Like we have a 4-week menu, and that's what they serve, and we serve that, and we break it down in certain ways and puree and do these different things to do it in order to help them digest it better and help them better utilize the material that we're giving them, therefore cutting down costs, making everything more efficient, keeping them healthy, alive, last longer, bringing in the money. But that's the non-cynical version of that, keeping them alive, and then hopefully making them have a better quality of life because they're getting the proper nutrients. And there's a lot of science behind all of this stuff, but it really is every resident in our building has their own meal plan.
Yeah. Okay, so you said a couple of interesting things there. First of all, like I agree with you about like the adaptation periods to diets. Like it usually, like people, if they're not feeling better in a couple of days, or if they're not losing weight generally, right, or whatever, if that's generally it, then they dump the diet. One of the things that was really interesting to me about the switch to the carnivore diet, the only way that it took me a little bit to get adapted, I'd say, is that for like the first week that I was on it, I didn't have quite as much energy for like cardiovascular exercise. Like it felt a little harder, but I didn't feel tired like outside of the exercise. It was just like my body hadn't quite figured out yet how to use it for more aggressive exercise. And that lasted for 1 week. But for me, I felt what you're talking about in terms of like the even energy level within 24 hours. Like it was exactly like you said, like it was bedtime, and like I was like, holy fuck, I'm not tired at all. How am I going to be able to sleep? But I closed my eyes and I went to sleep, and I slept, and I did have like for the first couple weeks, sometimes I'm waking up to go to the bathroom quite a bit in the middle of the night to pee, for some reason, like I don't know if it was just my body was using water differently or what was going on. And sometimes when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I'd have either a dry mouth or like a metallic tasting mouth, but that passed pretty quickly. And then for me over time, I guess, and it has to be balanced with, have I done any like, oh, well, I did mostly carnivore, but I ate this little bit of shit. And so maybe I don't feel quite as amazing. Or it could also just be that sometimes you get really used to something, so you don't appreciate the novelty of how different it feels anymore. But I think I've never had any other eating plan where I felt the difference that day. Well, that's not true. When I tried the vegan diet, the first day of the vegan diet, I fucking felt hungry. I felt hungry and not satisfied, but it wasn't a particular feeling in my body of either more energy or less energy or feeling good or bad or losing weight or gaining weight, whatever, right? Like, and the other thing with the carnivore diet is because you're eating a few variety of meats maybe, but you're not eating this vast variety of foods that you would normally eat. So like, it's pretty easy to tell what is making you feel good or what is not making you feel good, right? And so that was kind of interesting, but I agree with you about like doing things in a cyclical sort of pattern, right? Like I'll kind of And I've talked to like a lot of people, and some who like are like, I have a guy that I've kind of befriended named Rob Stewart, who I've had him on the show, and he's an interesting guy in the sort of carnivore community. Like, he's a skin health expert. Like, he helps people use diet to clear like eczema and rosacea and psoriasis and all that kind of stuff. And he first did it through being a vegan, but then that left him with a lot of other health problems. So then he became a carnivore and actually found it to be just as effective or more effective with a lot of his clients for solving the same set of problems in a way, but not creating other health issues afterwards, right? And he's an interesting guy, but he's all about the cycling, right? Like, we kind of had a conversation about that, where it's kind of like being sort of hit the carnivore hard for a period of weeks, and then take a week or two where maybe you bring in some carbs or some other things that sit okay with your body, right? And do that for a little bit. And during that period is actually where you can make a lot of if you're a person like myself or yourself who likes to exercise, like, you can make that push to the next level then, because you have two different energy sources coming in that your body knows how to use both of. And if you're only using the carbohydrates that your body does well with, it's not going to be a struggle to incorporate them, right? So he'll use that period to build his muscle, or to try a new activity, or if he has a project to do or something like that, and then go back to the carnivore, and then just kind of continue, and every time he does a cycle, he makes like one or two small changes to what he's doing to start to see what really works well. And I think that's one of the things that, whether you are vegan or carnivore or whatever, everybody should start to consider their body as their own laboratory. Right? Like, that's something that we all have the right to do by definition of being here, is to experiment with our own body. It doesn't hurt anyone else, right? And for sure, right? When you're listening to somebody else give the reports on their experiment, you don't know if they have a bias in the outcome, or if there was something that they didn't do right in their laboratory, or whatever. But you know what you're doing with your body, and you're allowed, you know what I mean? And it's not affecting anyone else. So I feel like that's a great, like, learning to, before you start worrying about how you're going to like hack the simulation or hack the matrix or whatever, like, figure out how you hack your body first, and get to know, like, on a pretty predictable one-to-one basis, what doing this causes. If you do this action, it causes this. If you do that action, it causes that. And then you can start to carry that out to some other things, I think. But like, it's the best, like, test ground period is your body.
Absolutely. And, in terms of, personal sovereignty, why wouldn't you be, we talk a lot about taking back your soul, taking back your mind, but why wouldn't you want to do that with your body? And just kind of share, personally, my own current experience. When I was young, I had, really strong body, really strong soul. I did martial arts, and my soul is what it was. And I knew I was developing my thought, I was developing my mind. And then for a while, I got kind of obsessed with developing my mind for a while, so I let my body go. And, reach an equilibrium between mind and soul, but not the body was then, it's whatever, I can do it. Like, I'm this, why do I need that body? Now that I've finally brought myself back to that shape that I was in when I was younger and used to fight and practice martial arts, like what I call fighting shape, I finally feel the most clarity that I should have, and all of that stuff that I've even been trying to shut off for years comes back online almost as a reflex, because I'm just that clear, just that in tune with things, that it's almost undeniable. It flows through me. I don't have to try it. So it's been really important to discover that, because I thought I was okay for so long, like my mind and my soul were right. I had everything balanced, I had everything in line. I thought I was good. I thought I was good as I was going to get, and everything was fine. And then I did this kind of as a hobby, and as it kind of started to come in or into line with the rest of things, that's when I started to notice, well, fuck, this is making me even more powerful. This is making me even more alert. This is making me even more ready to deal with things when they come. I'm less sad. I'm less angry. I'm less in fear of things that are going on, because I feel more equipped to deal with life on a whole other level that I didn't feel like I was equipped to deal with it yesterday, or not yesterday literally, but
Yeah, no, basically yesterday. People are very confused about how much time is how much time.
Right.
No, I agree with you about that. I mean, it's very similar for me. Like, I think obviously with the gymnastics and stuff, I did all this physical stuff, and then you sort of grow up, you do your thing, you start to have your set of issues and your problems, and you know, that maybe is a time where you're not keeping your body in such good a shape, and then you sort of have a come to moment. But then the first place you often go is the spiritual, or like the, you know, trying to figure things out, and really it's a mental space, and things don't really come back into balance until you're sort of doing both, right? And it's one of the things that's sort of been frustrating for me about our community a lot. You know what I mean? There's like a lot of people that, like, while they don't like that, like, we're being poisoned with pesticides and GMOs and pharmaceutical drugs and stuff like that, they haven't gone and taken that next step into really taking ownership of their body by being incredibly physical, right? And I've gotten to a space where, like, it's hard for me to take seriously someone who's afraid of a forced vaccination if they're not even going to be able to make a run for it if they come to your door with the needle, right? Like, it's hard for me to take that seriously. And, you know, but at the same time, I also know that, like, I wasn't at that space of awareness until I was. And there was a period of time where I was sitting in my room, just watching videos, eating candy, doing drugs, talking about all this poison that they're doing to us and whatever. And, you know, not feeling like I had to explain for all the poisoning I was doing to myself, and the not caring for the body. But no, I think when the body is fit, the things we know up here, like, sync up perfectly with what we can do with our body. And it becomes like a seamless, like a Bruce Lee, like, be like water, my friend, kind of thing, as opposed to struggling really hard to get everything in line with itself, right?
Absolutely. And just even the, you know, there's something in exercise called a mind-muscle connection. Sorry, excuse me. And, you know, what's the word there? Connection, right? So you're developing connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different than developing like a mind-to-soul connection. It's no different than developing a heart-to-mind connection. It's no different than developing any other type of connection. It feels the same. The process is the same. And learning to do so just makes you better at every other thing you ever learn, right?
Yeah.
So it's just one other way that you can take control of your existence here and practice discipline. And, you know, when you were talking there about basically, I feel really frustrated myself because I feel like it's an irresponsibility. This phrase keeps repeating, like, humans are just very irresponsible. We don't want to take control of the problem. We just want to complain about the problem. We just want to point at how we're being fucked over. We don't want to go, okay, we're being fucked over, but what can I take back from that? What can I be like, I don't have to do this, I can do this. What, I can control this, so I'm going to control that. Like, at least do what you can. You know, if you can't walk, at least crawl. Yeah, we gotta keep moving. So it's really kind of irresponsible to be that person who's sitting there complaining about the world and complaining about, you know, the way things are, but at the same time not doing anything about it, at least even for themselves. And it starts there, and then we echo out. But
yeah, well, I also, like, if what you're talking about here, like, if each person sort of took responsibility, like, in that really meaningful way for their body, and that means doing the things to keep it healthy, but also going, okay, this is my body, I have the right to experiment with it the way that I want, and to know what works, and to know what makes me at my optimum, and this, that, and the other thing, then they wouldn't be able to fuck us over, right? And so, like, it isn't like, you know, and it's a lot harder to shift the whole world, right? And it's a lot harder to go, I don't have enough power to change myself, but somehow I'm going to pound on my keyboard enough to change the whole world. And then when all of that comes into alignment, then I'll be able to change myself. Whereas if each person just, I'm going to change myself, then all that other stuff, like a well person, well people wouldn't tolerate any of this shit. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, if everyone, you know, go back to the root. If the problem is that all of this information was denied to us and we didn't get taught better and we didn't know better and we didn't do better because we didn't know better, well, now we know better and you're still not doing better, right? You might as well start now that you know, and teach your friends and lead by example to those around you. And, you know, what's that stupid phrase, be the change that you want to see in the world, right? It is kind of that simple. And the benefit to discipline, or the benefit to learning new skills or taking on new hobbies, it's like learning another language. Every language you go to learn after you learn that language becomes easier to learn because now you have a bigger frame of reference for it. You have more tools to deal with whatever comes along next. So, whether it's your body, your mind, or your soul, whatever your practice becomes, it makes other practices seem easier. If you learn one breathing method, learning Wim Hof doesn't seem as daunting because you've already learned one. Right? And the same thing here. We've spent all this time learning all this stuff about the Anunnaki and the blah 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 and the blah blah blah, and we've done a really good job with it, right? But we could take all of that energy and we could put it into bettering our world from within and then without. And you're talking to someone, or I'm someone talking to you as someone who believes that this isn't even real and that we're in a matrix, and yet I still think that it's important for us to do this. So that's how important it is for us to do this, and how sure I am that if we had have done this, then we wouldn't have ended up where we are. But
yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to ask you about a couple of things that came up while you were speaking during this period of time. So you said you've always had issues with sleep, right? And myself as well, like mostly sleep paralysis, which, for the most part, really got better for me. A, definitely when I stopped doing drugs, but B, when I stopped consuming sugar. Like every once in a while, I'll still have like a little minor episode, but nothing serious. Are you talking mostly about sleep paralysis, or were you like a sleepwalker, or what kind of stuff did you have going on in your sleep that has been resolved by either by cleaning up your diet or by the carnivore diet in particular?
A lot of insomnia, like a lot of just not being able to
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Sleep eating as well. Like it's kind of like sleepwalking, but I would get up and I would raid things. And I live with roommates, so when I first moved in here, it was an issue. I got on this diet and kind of went away for a while, and then when I was switching off the diet a bit, it started to come back a bit. And even now, when I kind of fuck it up for a few days in a row, then it'll come back, and I'll sleep eat, and so that was obviously tied to that too. I think that's again sugar, and nighttime is when we're getting blasted with all that. The kind of more nefarious frequencies, right? Where they're the stuff that we're taking in for dream time and whatnot. All those frequencies are coming in at night, and so the programmable matter within our bodies, whether that's sugar or any other type of substance, that's the time for it to really hit us. And so that would cause sleep paralysis. That would cause a lot of issues that we have kind of collectively sleeping at night. But yeah, that switching that diet definitely took that away from me. Like I've been a lot more restful. Maybe I shouldn't even blame the diet. Maybe I should think of something else, but we don't need to go there. Mostly the diet. I started the diet before I made that.
I can guess what that is.
It's going to go on a little bit of a personal rant I didn't need to go on. But yeah, I think like the diet I did start before that. So yeah, it's definitely a big change. And there's also the learning process, and like a lot of vegans and vegetarians already understand this, that you have to learn how to supplement everything that you're not getting anymore. You have to learn what it is that you're taking from the food that you're eating in order to understand how the diet's actually working a lot of the time. Been really kind of fascinating with my roommate because he's almost doing like the native style of like, I'm going to use all parts of the animal. You know, go to a butcher and I'll get hearts and I'll get kidneys and I'll get everything, and I'll learn how to eat bone and I'll learn how to eat everything so that I understand, like, that if I'm going to eat animals, then I want to understand it as well as I can. And I've already done that, so I don't need to do that now with the diet. But that's an important thing too, is like that learning process. Yeah. Again, it's like learning another language, because it is another language. And then every language you go to learn from beyond that. So, take the step and learn a new skill, and then suddenly other things are just falling into line a little bit better too. So that's why it's important to, like we keep saying, to never kind of let yourself sit on a plateau with anything. Just about anything in life, if you get to a place where you're like, okay, I'm good now, enjoy that for a while. Of course, by all means, enjoy that for a while, but don't just stay there. Be like, okay, well, where's the next challenge? Yeah.
So what you were saying, So I also had a lot of insomnia. Like, I mean, I've had periods of time, even up to like 2 weeks or more, even, I'm not talking about times on drugs, so, right, where I was unable to sleep for really extensive periods of time. And I have ideas about, why that possibly was. But the sleep eating thing is fascinating. Like, that is not, I mean, I have in my life sometimes woken up in the middle of the night and been hungry, but it's been a very conscious thing, and not eating some weird thing that I wouldn't normally eat necessarily, right? But both my stepmother and my stepbrother were sleep eaters, and it was very odd because, like, sometimes I would either be awake when they did this, or I might wake up because I heard them, and I would like go out into the kitchen and they're not there. They're just like in the, like they'd be standing at the refrigerator doing it there, like not at the table or whatever. But my brother was at least eating things that were like in his normal realm of things to eat. But my stepmother, it was odd. Like, she'd eat things like the children's cereal that she didn't like it, like chocolate Captain Crunch and stuff like that, or things she never ate in her waking life. And she'd be doing it like right there at the refrigerator, right? Just like taking the swig of milk. It was very odd. And it was, I hadn't seen that before, but it's very weird to observe. That wasn't one that I had, at least not that I'm aware of. I've never had woken up in the morning and food not been there that should have been there or anything like that. But that's an interesting one. There was also a lot of issues in my neighborhood that I grew up in with kids sleepwalking, which to me largely says that there was lots of kids that were wrapped up in the programs. But there was one kid who lived on the corner who is my sister and his sister were very friendly and whatnot, but he would wake up and walk around, and one night he like woke up at our front door about to knock on the front door, right? It almost, and I was very curious. I mean, at the time I didn't know what it was. Now in hindsight, it was like, was he coming to get me for our adventure for the evening kind of thing, right? So that's an interesting thing. You also brought it to, in terms of like the mind control, and you were talking about how there was specific diets for specific programs or things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I have a very particular maybe way that I've tried to, I think that I have a different set of memories, a different kind of set of memories than you have from your childhood, because I think even though we were probably involved in a lot of similar stuff, we were doing different things within that. And so I think maybe like I have some more of certain kind of experiences because I was actually unknowingly in them, whereas you were aware of them, so you wouldn't experience them in the same way, right? Like it was just a different, it's like the difference between being in the game and being the coach or something like that, or being the reporter, right? And so how did you see diet used in various programs? And then I'm going to say kind of what my observations were about that.
Well, obviously there's the energetic property of food, which was a big thing, especially when we were younger, and a lot of the programs that we were in were based on things that were more spiritual or psychic than physical. And then when you were, obviously it's more common for boys to get into more physical programs than it is for females, but
not this female.
but exactly, but there are still very physical programs that females would get into.
Yeah.
And usually a lot of those very physical programs had something that was like kind of tied to it. I think the best example I can think of, and the only time I ever asked for an explanation and got one, was a certain water program where we were spending a lot of time underwater and holding our breaths for a long period of time. We were fed all seafood. Mm-hmm. We were eating things that were capable of taking the pressure of being that deep. We were eating things that were capable of producing oxygen from water, and we were eating things that had those benefits, and for long periods of time. Again, like cellular growth, it happens in cycles, right? Like cellular regeneration, anyways, it happens in cycles. Like we have the whole 7-year cycle where you're pretty much a whole brand new person at the end of it, right? So there would be like periods of time leading up to things, and then during it, and then afterwards, where you would continue these diets because it was making your cells more similar to something that
Mhm.
was best suited for your environment. And
Yeah.
then because they know more than we do in the mainstream world, they know that you literally are what you eat. And if you are going to exist in a certain environment, and that's why it seems to anthropologists that, you know, like the Eskimo example, they only eat meat and that their body processes it that way. And it's because that's all that's available. It's not necessarily it's all that's available, but for their environment, that's what would make them the best. Think about it. You're eating other food that can survive in that same environment, right? So it just makes sense. So again, with diets, doesn't apply to us in today's modern society because we have all these amenities and whatnot, but I'm sure like your diet would be very much based on where you live, not just because that food is available there. Well, and I also think that nature knows that, you know, if you're going to live that close to the equator, then you're going to burn off a lot more water and you're going to need to eat a lot more fruit, you know, and I'm sure that like nature understands those things as well. So as it tied into programs, that was the same thing was, you know, if you were doing something that required a lot of, say, spiritual energy, or they were going to try and take a lot of spiritual energy from you, then they would feed you stuff with a lot of spiritual energy in it, like fresh organic fruits and vegetables, like picked straight off a tree. We used to get that, right? Like a lot of
Mhm.
things, these that they grow their own food down there. They have the artificial light to do it, and they would literally go take our dinner off trees at times and feed it to us. And that's a lot different than buying an apple at a grocery store,
Yeah.
right? So, um, yeah, there's all those things that I'm saying can still apply to us now, or we can apply them to ourselves now. You know, like the environment that I live in, I can get a lot of energy from a lot of different places. I don't necessarily need to be taking it out of my food, right? I live in a major city with
Mhm.
way too much energy,
Yeah.
right? So I really don't need that extra energy to operate. I can generate it just fine. So I don't necessarily need that type of energy. I need different materials in order to do what I do and function. And so I choose what I do based on that. And so I learned that through, you know, observation mostly, that they were feeding us things that were relevant to what we were doing.
So
Right?
that's very interesting. Okay, so like the way this is like these are the things that I've sort of figured out, right? Like I figured out that um that the first thing I started to pay attention to is that most people that I know who either know they were involved in projects and programs, or maybe I have a suspicion that they were, or they may have a suspicion that a lot of us were not permitted, our parents didn't let us eat sugar, right? Like, and that doesn't mean we never ate sugar, but it was something that we never ate at home, right? Like no candy at home or anything like that. And yeah, like, and no sugar cereal, like none of that stuff. Like really, like, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say we were fed a super perfectly clean, healthy diet, but there was an absolutely no candy, no junk food kind of policy. And then I started to, as you were, you know, and then I start, you know, at a certain point, it was like, okay, like I have a feeling that exactly what you're talking about. When we were doing like more psychic kind of activities, right? It was a lot of fruit, especially when you're a kid. Fruit's a better sell for kids than vegetables, right? You know what I mean? But also that what you're talking about, like there's nothing better for a little kid to go pick the thing right off the tree and eat it. And whether that was in a controlled setting, in an underground kind of thing, you grew up in a different kind of area than I did, or whether you were in a place where above ground there was a natural sort of habitat where you could go around picking nuts and this and that, or where even people in your neighborhood had a fruit on their trees and things like that, and so you thought you were playing, but that drive for that was kind of there. I would go through cycles with my eating where it would seem like either coming from me or being imposed, but more often coming from me. I would just want to eat the same thing every day for a period of time, and then all of a sudden it would switch. So that could be like, and it wasn't things that kids normally get into that with necessarily. It wasn't the type of, like, some kids will get into just wanting to eat macaroni and cheese or peanut butter and jelly or whatever. It wasn't that, right? So I did have that notice. And then I also, at a certain point, like when there'd be a period where I was doing a lot of exercise, well, some of them I think were exercises and some were presented as exercises, even though they may have been more of a real thing. A lot of exercises that were like Hunger Games kind of activities, right? Like a lot of chase the maiden and you know, run for your life kind of, you know, whatever, that there'd be a lot of meat eating at those periods of times in my life. Like suddenly my dad was barbecuing ribs like almost every night, right? You know, or whatever, or you know, there was like a lot of hamburger eating going on, or whatever it is, right? And so, but I had not thought about the seafood in relation to the underwater breathing before. And now that you say that, like, I remember this particular period of time where it was like all I was fucking getting first at school or at camp was tuna fish, right? Like tuna fish. And it's like, okay, kids like that. That's a seafood that they'll eat, right? Like it is, you know, they may try and get you to eat certain things that you don't want to eat, but I felt like that was always more saved for really unsavory activities, not so much in your daily diet. But so they would find the ones that you would eat. And so for a kid, that would be tuna fish and chips, or, you know, things like that that a kid might take. But also there was a few times, maybe it was more than a few, but in your head as a kid, it's hard to separate what was like multiple times and what was just one or two really meaningful times, where my dad would bring me my dinner in the car when he picked me up from gym, and it would be like salmon, and I fucking hated salmon. But he would make me eat it, which is not something my dad was, I didn't have a lot of rules when I was a kid. It wasn't like you better eat this, or, you know, whatever, it's gonna be your breakfast the next morning. There was not a lot of that in my house, but for some reason, when it was the salmon for dinner, it was like, you have to eat this. And you can't go to your room or you can't go to sleep until you eat it. And I could never quite understand why, because that didn't exist with other dinners, right? So it wasn't like a tool that my parents used to discipline me, right? But it was like, you have to eat the fucking fish, right? And if you needed gills the next day or that week or whatever, right, then it goes to sort of what you were saying. And then I also noticed that while I didn't get candy or junk food at home, there was certain places I always got it, right? They seemed like odd places sometimes to get it, right? And like even at the summer camp, like I remember that like there would be, I would not ever have candy there during the day, right? But sometimes I'd get a piece of candy before I went home, right? And the kid might think of that as a reward, but what I understand now is, no, that was actually the mind eraser. That was actually like the, right? So like I do all my activities early in the day in, the camp. It seemed like that was both at camp and at school. There was a lot of separating of myself or maybe one or two other kids from the rest of the group, right? And then later after we had rejoined, it would be time at the pool or something like that. And then the candy and then go home, that kind of thing. And then also like when I went to my mother's house, after my parents got divorced, it was like unlimited junk food at my mother's house. And that wasn't not something that she normally ate, nor did it feel like it was something that like she was trying to do to like get us to like her or anything like that. It was almost more seemed like it was there to create a certain mind state, right, kind of thing. What do you think about all that stuff? And then I have something else I want to say about sugar and sleep based on something you brought up.
Well, yeah, I mean, like certain routine patterns and stuff like that were used as tools. I didn't have too much of that. I mean, I was allowed sugar when they really wanted me under control, right? So I was, I would always go to an aunt's house. My aunt was famous for having a whole drawer full of chocolate bars at her house, and like cans of pop stacked up to the ceiling. You could get a lot of sugar there, and that was a big part of it. Was they liked it when I was all jacked up on sugar because they could use their frequency stuff that I hadn't figured out yet. Especially when I was really young. Kind of against me. So yeah, it's also that happy meal on the way home.
The happy meal on the way home was a big one. Yeah.
That's just regular like psychological programming, or like it's pretty. They're doing it to every kid really, but with the toy and the happy meal type thing. But on the deeper level for us, that's why it was like such a big deal when we were kids.
It was never the toy for us. Like the toy wasn't what the issue was with never for me.
The happy meal to begin with, because it wasn't regular for us, right? It was a lot of the other kids who wanted the toy and the happy meal got the garbage food at home still. Not the garbage food, the junk food at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like that was another thing. Like my dad never took me to McDonald's, but on the one night a week, my mom would pick me up from gymnastics. Like a lot of times it was to McDonald's or sometimes like what's weird is, so that's something that carried over. And like later as an adult, like even before I was like super into healthy eating like I am now, I had a reasonable diet at some point as an adult, but because I was using a lot of drugs, sometimes that would get off into other things. And I had this period of time where like, whenever I had been up for an extended period of time on drugs, now my recall of some of those times is probably not particularly accurate, but like when I would be starting to come down or like going home or something like that, even though like I had been out of eating McDonald's for years and years and years, suddenly I was wanting to stop at the McDonald's on the way home and eat a Happy Meal, which to me was, in hindsight, is the signifier that there was something deeper going on than just the drug use in some ways. But when I first read Elisa E's books, I don't know if you've ever read her books. Have you read her books?
No.
Oh, go read her books. It's an interesting read because like as much stuff as like you or I may have been able to have sussed up from our past on our own, it'll bring up some shit that you'd be like, holy shit, right? She talked about every time she was on the way back from a task, as she calls it, right? And this being as an adult and not a super young adult, right? That she would stop for McDonald's French fries kind of on the way back in, right? And if you think about like the way that those things smell and taste, there's such like a particular thing with it. And that goes for everybody, but particularly for somebody who doesn't get it very often and then is in a very, let's say, heightened hormonal state after certain activities, that like it's very it's a different experience even than it is for the normal person.
Well, yeah, it's like you attach things, right? It's like a bonding. It's smell is very like biggest thing attached to memory, and that's why a lot of those things that they used, such as that, had a very strong smell, like something like a really sour candy,
Mm-hmm.
yep. French fries, something like that, right? And that's why it's kind of like electroshock therapy if you were like training a dog, with a electric fence. Is every time you go you get that shock. It's the opposite of that. Every time you do it you get that relief, like that high, more or less, and it becomes attached to it. So they start doing that to us when we're kids, so that when we're adults we just continue doing it to ourselves. We associate the experience with the reward at the end of it. And then that reward, it's kind of like, and you've done drugs, you understand, you like the shower at the end of your Coke binge. You know what I mean? And like brushing your teeth after ecstasy, like something like that, where like it's just like, oh, okay, now I'm back to normal.
It's like the demarcation between one phase and the other phase. Exactly. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you're fully back. It's just you're now, it's like when you go from being like in the stadium, like into the hallway, into the locker room, right? There's like significant phases, right? And then you leave the locker room and you go home, right? Yeah.
It's conditioning, but the proper word for this form of conditioning is ritualistic, right? It's a ritual thing.
Yeah.
They create the ritual, you perpetuate the ritual later in life, and that's what keeps you bonded to the experience.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the sour candy too, right? Because those are like that. I went through a phase where I just could not get a candy sour enough to accomplish whatever the fuck it is I was trying to accomplish with it, right? Like those aren't anywhere near my favorite kinds of candy, right? And like I've gotten to the point with some of these candies where like my tongue was raw, right? And it wasn't, and it seemed to me that the popularization of sour candies came at a particular point when there had been a shift from like what I would call like more of an analog mind control to more of a digital mind control. And the sour candy seemed to come along with that. Am I right on that?
Yep, it's a little bit more of a shock to the nervous system.
Yeah.
Like a heightened shock with a little bit more electric, I guess. Like a little bit similar to getting zapped.
Yeah.
The effect that a sour sweetness would have over your regular sweet. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You said something before about like the sugar, like before bed while you're sleeping and whatnot. And I want to address that in a second, but even just the digestion of food is a psychedelic process of sorts, right? And a lot of people who have like night terrors and nightmares and stuff like that, if you really dig into like esoteric nutrition and esoteric anatomy, actually, like when people are having trouble digesting food, or food that they may think is good for them that actually isn't, like that could be the creator of some of these night terror kinds of dreams, where animal foods, not that there's not any psychedelic aspect to the digestion of that, but it's easier for our body to digest. So it doesn't have to have as like outlandish of an experience to sort of assimilate it. And that was kind of an interesting thing to understand food as like, you know, the original sort of psychedelic experience, right? And then you have sugar come in, which is not necessarily hard to digest, like simple sugars like candy, what you're talking about, but all these other things break down to sugars as well. One of the things you were talking about, like that's the great time for the programming, because that's when all of the nefarious frequencies are abound, and it's an odd time anyway energetically. But how familiar are you with like the lily wave stuff?
I don't like dream modification stuff like that, or
So lily waves are like, if you live in a house that has like electricity that is run from a grid, basically you have this dirty electricity that has what's called lily waves in your walls. These lily waves were invented by the same person, John Lilly, who came up with our deprivation tanks and all this other kind of stuff, right? So have you ever had that experience? And for a long time, I associated my ability to, well, I still associate my ability to see it and recognize it as having been something that I was only able to achieve through like the heightened state of drugs on a certain level, but it's definitely there. And what you're talking about with the sugar before bed and that being your biggest programming time. So the lily waves, like I would used to, like after being up for a couple of days, I'd like lay back in my bed and I was kind of waiting to fall asleep. Like I was like tired enough, I was coming down, but I wasn't quite there to fall asleep yet. And I started to notice like out of the vents in the wall and out of the like sockets, the plugs and stuff, that there was little stuff that looked almost like black particle tech, like nanotech. And my cat seemed to see it too, right? Like we'd be sitting there on the bed looking at the same thing. And it seemed to be sort of like coming away from the walls, almost as if coming towards me. And it wasn't like something scary. I'm not saying it formed into entity faces, but I was definitely this stuff that was like coming out of these spaces. And then when I learned about lily waves from somebody, I was like, oh, maybe that's what I was seeing. And I just normally in your normal state, you can't quite see it. And what's interesting about, I'll send you this article so that you can check it out sometime, because it might be pretty meaningful to you. There's probably a lot of stuff in there that would be interesting for you to look at and understand. But there's a particular part, let me see if I can find it. You know, and of course, Lily was into with the NIH and the Navy and all that kind of stuff. Let me see if I can find the little part where it talks about sugar. Well, it talks about lily waves and their ability to directly affect water molecules, right? But it also, it says here we go. If a molecule is targeted by a wave that resonates at the same frequency as that molecule, the molecule will explode. Sugar is a crystal, and crystals, when stressed, broken, or deformed, release an electric and electromagnetic charge. This is known as triboluminescence. The effect of an exploding sugar crystal is quite damaging to the mind and brain. It creates extreme confusion, dizziness, and also a state best described as lack of awareness or apathy. Lily wave frequency is a secret military application. It is known as the madness frequency. And then there's like another little part down here that talks about how, you know, it doesn't have to be like even freshly consumed sugar. It can just, your blood sugar in general, right? If there's over, and my theory has always been over 5 grams of sugar in the blood, hence the coding of 5G, right? Kind of thing. It's a similar kind of application that, and actually 5 grams is your resting blood sugar if you haven't consumed anything that has anything in that. So it's basically these lily waves would work hand in glove with the sugar in our body to create exactly what you're talking about. And to my mind, it's fascinating that we have the same person that gave us these tanks where we would often hold our breath, right? Whether, I mean, we had tanks that had water in them and ones that didn't, but this is the guy who had the Flipper TV show and the anechoic chambers and then these waves. and whatnot. And it's almost like he was a one-stop shop for all the technology that you needed for, a nice little installation, or whatever it was. So I hadn't really thought about it in terms of so much the sugar, how it affected me when I was sleeping. I guess I always thought of it in terms of like creating time events for myself when I was awake and sort of on a certain level, like hopped up on sugar. But that's an interesting idea that really, just that whatever's going on in that sleep phase with the amount of blood sugar, this blood that's in your sugar, I hadn't really, I used to have all these trips out to buy candy in the middle of the night that I didn't quite understand. And then wake up in the morning sometimes and not really be kind of clear on how that all had gone down. But yeah, interesting. I'll send you the article on the lily waves. It's kind of interesting.
Anything crystal can store memory. Anything that's crystalline could be broke down into a liquid, can be used to transmit it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
good way to, with the more targeted type of programming or like that's why I brought up dream manipulation, because it's a lot of what they were using it for.
Yeah.
Just inceptions, like putting thoughts in your head, things like that. They can do a lot of that using the combination of like, so like what you're saying, the lily waves, I've always just seen as like stagnant energy. It's here, and that's what radio waves are based on as well. And that's, how they've manipulated it for forever. Obviously 5G is a more advanced form of control over that type of stuff, and that works hand in hand with this crystalline that we're all in consuming called sugar, and becomes the programmable matter, right? And that's the programmable part of it. Again, you are what you eat, and your matter becomes what you are. And therefore, it's the same thing. If you ever lose a lot of fat, you're going to start having these weird memories.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you start burning through fat, you start having memories of like, not even just the food that you ate, but like where you ate it and who you were with, or like feelings that you went through, or like periods of time that you've gone through. Like everybody who loses a lot of fat, they experience these things, and I've experienced it too. And it's because like these cells are holding memory, right? And these cells were created in a certain environment, and they have the memory of that environment still. So when they break down, that memory all gets released back into you, and you take it in somehow. And sugar does the same thing. So they can program the sugar with thoughts and memories and feelings and all of this stuff, and then have that break down and explode within you. And you end up taking on the feeling that they programmed it.
Well, that's what's so interesting when so I think all the lily wave does, like you just said, you think of it as like certain ever-present kinds of stuff there. I think all the lily wave does is like when you have a home or a modern structure, sort of like local, make sure that it's like sort of centers it in the area, right? Kind of thing, as opposed to be all around you. It's directly being sort of pumped into these kind of structures or being, dealt with there. These crystal explosions of things, right? So like with the programmable matter, and then there's this explosion based on the frequencies, it distributes it throughout your body so that you don't necessarily have a cohesive linear account necessarily of what happened. You have all these broken little pieces that sort of go everywhere, and they're assimilated in. And especially if you're consuming a fair amount of sugar, that sugar does turn to fat, and that's a much better store. Like the sugar is easier to program than the fat, but the fat stores it better. And so I hadn't really thought about it that way, but when I stopped eating sugar, like that's when a lot of my memories started coming back. But the other thing that went along with that is I never was really overweight, but I had definitely like been out of shape and had like a little layer of fat that I hadn't really necessarily had before. So some of that really old stuff that was coming back, that's interesting that it may have, sort of been, as I lost the fat, it was really that, as opposed to just becoming more clear from having the sugar not part of my diet. I mean, both things probably, but I hadn't thought about it in terms of the fat. But it is interesting, like when I work with people who are losing a lot of fat, I do prepare them for the fact that like it is stored in their, their trauma is stored in the fat, so they may have some emotional upsets that come. And I guess I just hadn't thought about that one in terms of myself, because I had always associated it more with sugar, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a interesting thing that, we have all this information kind of available to us in various places. It's just not all broken down into like one way in which relates to us as individuals. We know how like energy and crystals work. We know how water and energy and memory work. We know how, calcium as an example.
Yeah,
Which is
calcium's an interesting one.
exactly, and like
Yeah.
all of these different minerals that we are made up of, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really stop to think about the fact that we are made up of those things, right? And that's why a lot of people associate depression with weight gain, is because it's not just that you're overeating, it's actually that your metabolism is going fuck it. And like
Yeah.
all your insides are doing that, and then you overeat, and then you don't know how to deal with it, and then you start to get better, and you keep falling back into your depression, because why? You're burning those memories back out. You don't even know that you're doing it. Whereas like all of this education mixed with a little bit of discipline, we could all be, in a better spot for ourselves. But that's what the occult was all about, right? Was to try and make it so that we weren't in a good spot, and we, are sick, and we aren't well, and we can't handle shit. But again, we can take it all back now.
Yeah, I think we've just, it's not, this conversation was not necessarily about, oh, everybody should try carnivore as the solution to some of this kind of stuff. It's more, I mean, I think the place that I'm at is that, like, there's not a thing that works for every situation. So you have to be flexible in terms of like, the carnivore diet may be working great for you for a certain period of time, and then something about your life circumstance changes. Maybe you move from being in the city to out in the country, or you have a different kind of job and you need to switch it. But the point is that like you need to do that, like, right? Like you need to take responsibility for like recognizing these things within your own body and figuring out what works for you. And then once you figure out what works for you, also know that what's working now may, you could like, may work for a long time, but may at some point not work. And then you're going to have to make a shift again, and starting to develop that muscle of like flexibility and adaptability is really important as well. And these are things, I don't know, I feel like they're super helpful, partly just because like when you have that good control of your body and you figured out like a way of eating that works well for you, it really helps with the emotional ups and downs. It makes you less susceptible to whatever kind of mind control is trying to be applied to you, even though we've talked here about like, that certain diets were used for certain conditions in the body. Like all technologies can work sort of the other way as well. And if you know that a certain scenario is coming at you, there's a certain way of eating that's going to help you through that. And especially if you approach it with like awareness and consciousness, then, it can be really helpful. So that was kind of the purpose of this. We're going to switch over and go over to the patron section and have some conversation about Shane's latest works. But before we go, did you want to say anything else about the topic to the people?
Yeah, not really, I guess. I was thinking of something there, but I lost it. We're good.
We're good? Okay, cool. You can find, is everything right now on the Runer Author YouTube channel, or is there any place else where you're doing work right now?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just there, and best way to know what I'm putting there is either Twitter at the Runer Author, or Facebook. There's the Runer Author page on Facebook.
Cool. All right. We're going to see you guys in a few minutes. You can join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia for the rest. See you there. Bye.